I'd like to play a short piece of original music now as we go into the talk, and this is a piece called Dance for the Arctic Moon. It's dedicated to the sacred feminine dimension of consciousness, and I think in the unity tradition, and really in all the spiritual traditions, there's a huge emphasis at the core of the tradition of the power of receptivity, to open to a higher knowing. So Dance for the Arctic Moon, the whole idea is the Arctic represents the north of the four directions. That's typically the direction of going within, contemplating, and the moon represents cross-culturally the feminine dimension. So this is Dance for the Arctic Moon. I like to dedicate it to the healing of all of our relations and just creating a field of consciousness for the benefit of all. Enjoy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a delight to be here, and thank you so much, Reverend Gary. And let's have a hand for my wife, Madeline. She's the artist of the paintings you see up here. So she's all the way from Switzerland. So I'd like to talk a little bit about awakening your inner genius, and we'll be giving a workshop this afternoon on connecting with our intuition. So the basic idea in unity, really, is that all of us have within us an inner connection that we can cultivate with the infinite spirit of truth and love indwelling. Charles Fillmore is really quite well known for his saying that he thinks that we should go straight to headquarters, right? That idea, I go straight to headquarters. That we don't need an intermediary, as in other traditions, that we can, each one of us, cultivate the ability to go straight to headquarters, get our guidance within. For him, that was easy. That meant, I'll just ask Myrtle. But for the rest of us, I can ask Madeline, that's easy too. But for the rest of us, the sacred feminine, this capacity to receive and get guidance directly, going straight to headquarters ourselves, I think that's a tremendous gift. There's no greater friend any one of us can ever have than an inner knowing we can learn to connect with and rely on to live our unique life. And it doesn't mean that our life will always be easy, that we won't have any problems. We'll still have our challenges, but we'll be living our life, not somebody else's life. And there's a tremendous gift in that we give not only to ourselves and everyone around us, but I think to the whole human family and future generations. The more we connect with this inner guidance system and connect with this inner knowing to live our unique life, the more authentically we're living. And that really is the core of spirituality. Spirituality is not some outer thing. It's really our true nature. And so unity, I think, in many ways, is one of the healthiest movements in the world today, because it's based on this idea of inner empowerment through connecting directly, and the idea of radical inclusiveness. So we include not only everyone is welcome, but also the inclusivity of all the world's wisdom traditions. I think this is really fantastic, because when I was a kid, I was raised in a church where we had this idea that, we have this creed and we believe it and we'll get to go to heaven if we just believe that, that special heaven just for us. This kind of exclusivist idea. But unity really has this deep sense of inclusion. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, the co-founders of Unity, were deeply spiritual in the sense of connecting with their inner wisdom, and they could see the oneness of the wisdom traditions. How many of you have actually been to Unity Village at some point in your life? Somebody? Oh, look at that. Yeah, good. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. It's like going to Mecca. Once in your life, try to get there. It's a beautiful place of healing. Madeline and I have been there quite a few times over the years, and we're very blessed, I think, to have traveled full-time, lived in an RV, and then since then, pretty much full-time also in our little van, going to Unity churches. And so I think at this point, we've probably been to more Unity churches than anyone in the history of the world. I mean, we've been doing every state, North Dakota. When North Dakota gets one, then we'll be there. But every other state and many other countries in the world as well. And I just love the Unity movement because it has this a really precious teaching that's available to us, and it's based really on the idea of healing, that each one of us can connect with the source of healing. So, and actually I remember something now that we're here, my connection kind of with this church, Madeline and I, somewhat is through Rudy Harst. Anybody know Rudy? I think you probably do, right? So I remember we were at Unity Village with Rudy many years ago. I was playing the piano and he was doing Tai Chi up on the stage. But before that, I knew Rudy when he lived in California in the San Francisco Bay Area back in the, when was that? Boy, that was in the early 1982, something like that. So that's a long time ago. That's like over 40 years ago. And he was a live wire back then, and he probably still is now. I haven't seen him for quite a few years, but I think the last time we were here it was probably 20 years ago, I think. I'm not sure. We haven't been here for a while, so it's great to see the church looking so beautiful and the teachings continuing. And so the idea here that I'd like to emphasize is that when we're connecting with our intuition, we're also connecting with what the word of today was, joy. Joy is something that I think bubbles up inside of us continually, all the time. The problem is that we're raised in a society where we're taught to have our mind busy all the time, wishing we would have done that and wishing he wouldn't have done that. Or if he would have done that, I would have done this. Or if she does that, and what am I going to have for lunch? So we're continually busy in our minds. And so in many ways, the key, I think, to connecting with the inner joy that's bubbling like a spring all the time is to learn to quiet our minds. How many of you have a regular spiritual practice of some kind that you do on a daily basis? Yeah. Oh, good. That's great. I really recommend something like that. It's kind of like brushing your teeth. Something where we, on a regular basis, we practice bringing our minds back here again. And that helps us to develop the ability to be more present and also to begin to connect with this inner knowing, because as we go through our life, we are being guided by something, right? We're for some reason or other, have this job, we say this to that person, we go through our life every day, we're doing something. What are we guided by? What's propelling us as we live our life? I think if we look at it carefully, we see that it's one of two things. It's either, well, usually what it is, actually, it's the cultural program, right? We have, all of us when we're born here, we're like a little sponge. We just soak up everything, right? That's what their language becomes my language, their food becomes my food, their attitudes become my attitudes. And so we embody and we take all this in. And we go to church and their ideas become my ideas. So it's not always in our best interest. I don't mean Reverend Gary, but the other ministers. So we get these ideas. So we take all this in. And it's propelling us along. And so there's something we have to be aware of. Krishnamurti said something I think that's very important. He said, it's not a good idea to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society, right? So we have this basic idea. We want to be well adjusted. We want to get along. We would like to be like everybody else and fit in and all of that. But the question is, do we really want to fit in so much? So if we're not being guided by the cultural program, which is that we got from our parents and teachers and ministers, not Reverend Gary, the other ministers, and the news media and all this stuff, then that's propelling us. So we have to make an effort, really, to reconnect with our inner guidance system and have that be guiding us. And when that happens, that's when spirituality actually starts happening. If we're just fulfilling the cultural program and kind of robotically doing what everybody's buying, what we think we should buy, and marrying who they say we should marry, and all these things, there isn't spirituality. Spirituality comes from freedom, which comes from our connection with the infinite life. So it's this inner work. So I'd like to just tell just a brief story, because I think this sort of maybe makes it a little more vivid. When I was a kid growing up in Concord, I grew up in Concord, Massachusetts. That's where I was born and raised. It was kind of a nice place in the sense that there was all this history there, right? If you know the history of Concord, Massachusetts, it was the birth of the Revolution in 1775. Hardly a man is now alive who remembers the famous day and year of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flags to April breeze unfurled. Here once the embattled farmer stood and fired the shot heard round the world. Well, that was, anyway. I know in Texas you have a lot of history too, so. And the Alamo is not far away. But we have our Old North Bridge, and my father every April 19th, which is Patriots Day, he'd get dressed up in his Minuteman outfit, get the gun off the wall, and we'd go down and we'd celebrate the Revolution and shoot at the Redcoats and send them back to Boston and celebrate freedom and revolution. And I think it's good. We should make sure that we have freedom, and there's always forces trying to take it away, truly. But later in that in that same town in the 1800s, there was another kind of a more spiritual revolution. And so I was born in Emerson Hospital and learned to swim in Walden Pond. I went to Thoreau School and Alcott School. So if those names ring a bell, that's the birthplace of the Transcendentalist movement, which is really in many ways a key component of unity. And the Transcendentalists in Concord back in the 1800s were really the first ones in North America to bring in a lot of the teachings from Asia and other non-Western religions and traditions that, I think in many ways, enrich and deepen our own spirituality. The idea, for example, from the Taoist tradition of God as this universal principle that we can learn to understand and live in harmony with, or the idea from the Buddhist tradition of God as an infinite mind, and that mind is our mind. And when we open up our mind to this infinite mind, then we have this guidance. Or the idea from the Hindu tradition that God is equally female as male, this whole idea. So these ideas very much affected Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. The idea of spiritual healing was a big part of that as well. And so for myself, I somehow breathed that in a little bit, but I remember going away to college in Maine in the early 1970s, and I started reading their books for the first time, and I started really questioning everything. And I remember that led me to a book. Some of you may have heard of this. It's kind of a rare book, but anyway, some people have heard of it. It was called Cosmic Consciousness, written by a guy named Richard Buck back in the 1890s. The basic idea was most people live in what he called self-consciousness. We care about ourself. We go through our life and we're trying to get what we want and keep away what we don't want and so forth. But he said certain rare individuals, the great sages and saints and poets and prophets and mystics and so forth, both men and women through the ages, a few people had attained what he called cosmic consciousness. Basically, they somehow evolved beyond the sort of narrow focus of trying to get for myself and this pettiness, and they just loved everyone equally, and there was a feeling of illumination and a sense of spiritual awareness and a moral elevation, a loss of the fear of death and so forth. And he said these great people like Jesus and the Buddha and others were examples. But the key thing was, he said, it is the destiny of every human being to attain cosmic consciousness. That is, in a sense, our purpose here. This is like a training ground for us to develop our consciousness through the challenges that we face. And so I remember reading this book, and I got really inspired. And I thought, just going into the world of business and trying to make money. My father owned a whole chain of newspapers, and I was going to take that over. And I remember going back on the breaks and talking to my parents and saying, Mom, Dad, you know about cosmic consciousness, right? We're not here just to try to make money and all that. We're here to attain cosmic consciousness. And I remember my father said, well, this education of yours is costing me quite a lot of money. How's that going to help you get ahead in the world? And but the neat thing kind of was that they did understand. My father taught me to play the piano, and my mother was an artist, watercolor artist, and so I married one. I'm so happy. But but the neat thing was I have a younger brother named Ed, 2 years younger than me, and I talked to him about this, and to my delight, he said, "Yes, let's do it. Let's attain cosmic consciousness. What else is there to do? I mean, everything else is ridiculous." So we thought about it. Okay, so as soon as I graduated from Colby, we decided we would attain cosmic consciousness. And the question was like, all right, so now what do we do? And then we knew what to do. That's obvious what you do. There's only one thing. For sure it'll work. You go to California. 1975, so we thought, okay, we're going to go to California. And we thought, well, we won't just like drive there or take a plane or whatever. We will walk. So we decided to do a pilgrimage, just head west. Go west, young man. So we thought, all right, we're going to go west. And so I remember walking down the driveway of our parents' home. We had our little backpacks. We had some fresh baked cookies from my mother, and we headed west, walking. And we didn't have any money. We decided we would do it without any money. We would just meditate like the sadhus of India, just meditating. Somehow the universe would take care of us. And after, I don't know, three weeks maybe, we'd gotten as far as Buffalo. And in Buffalo, it was freezing. It was October, and we changed our plan. We thought, the heck with that, we better head south. So we just started walking about 20 miles a day on these little tiny backcountry roads, down through upstate New York, into Pennsylvania, across Pennsylvania, into West Virginia. Across West Virginia, when we got to West Virginia, they said, boys, you're in the Bible Belt. And I didn't know what the Bible Belt was, but I found out pretty quickly. And so it got very interesting because we had no money. We were completely vulnerable, and we were just meditating. And we were staying a lot in churches and talking to everybody in the churches, but we were doing a practice that came from India of self-inquiry, going deeper with the question of who am I, or what am I? And anyway, we got through West Virginia into eastern Kentucky, and down through eastern Kentucky into Tennessee, and we eventually ended up for a while at the farm. If you've ever heard of the farm in 1975 was the largest hippie commune in the world. They had about 900 people living there, all from California. So we met them in the middle. They were all vegetarians, so actually I became a vegetarian. I've been a vegetarian ever since then, actually a vegan now. And Madeline also, when I met her years later. We continued, actually after being there for a few months, maybe a month or so, we continued all the way to Alabama. We ended up, believe it or not, at a Zen Buddhist center in Huntsville, Alabama. And then from there, eventually I did get to California, eventually became a Zen Buddhist monk in Korea, eventually left that, got my PhD at Berkeley, taught college, and discovered unity, which I have to say is an incredible, powerful, beautiful teaching and community and awareness. And I've been in love with unity, ever since. But I want to just kind of close my talk and emphasize this main point, which is kind of goes with the theme of today. As we were walking all those months that we did with nothing, and I remember that we had no reason to be happy, right? I mean, but I would find sometimes these waves of joy washing over me, where some little back road in Kentucky or whatever, and I would be so happy. And I realized that that's our true nature. Our true nature is just this enormous, unreasonable joy. We don't need a reason to be happy. Just being conscious and aware and the beauty. How many of you have noticed by now that the earth is beautiful? Anybody? It's so beautiful. The trees, right now, the leaves are coming out, the birds are singing. I mean, last night in our little van, we spent the night in a parking lot and in our little van, so we do. and early this morning, when it was still dark, a mockingbird started singing, and it's just universal. In the morning, the birds start singing. And there's such a joy. The creation is joy. And so I remember on this walk, I would feel this joy. And there was no reason to feel it, in the sense that we had no security, we had no money, we weren't doing what we were supposed to do, we weren't following orders at all. We were basically just trusting our own inner guidance on everything. And this tremendous joy, which I think is our true nature. That's it. So it's enormously liberating to realize that there's nothing in the outer world that can ever bring us joy. The only thing that brings us joy is within us. We can bring happiness and joy to others, but we don't have to try to get it from buying something or making it happen. We are joy already, and we can allow ourselves to connect with that on a daily basis, and then bring that into the work that we're doing, the relationships that we're having. And when we create communities like this unity here in New Braunfels, when we help co-create a community that's based on these ancient wisdom traditions that go back thousands of years, then we are doing something with our life that is enormously helpful. This is really important. In the Buddhist tradition, there's essential teaching is that there are 3 jewels, the 3 most precious. They're not even things, they're principles. One is Buddha. Buddha is what we would call in unity the Christ, our true nature, the light that is our true nature of internal consciousness. What we are was never born and will never die. That's the Christ, that's Buddha. Dharma is the teachings that actually help us to attain Christ consciousness. The teachings are so precious. So there's the Buddha, the Dharma, and then the 3rd jewel. Does anyone know what it is? The 3rd jewel? The Sangha. The Sangha is the community of people who are doing their best to understand and propagate the teaching so they can attain the Christ, the wisdom, what we call the Buddha nature. And the Buddha said something interesting. He said, without the Sangha, there will be no Buddha and no Dharma. So this, in a way, it's the most precious. The community is so important. So when we do these 2 things, when we take time every day to reconnect with the inner wisdom that's always shining, the inner joy, the inner peace, that's our true nature, And then the second thing, to then co-create communities that help to bring this into the world, to help to feed this, to help propagate this, to help to understand it. Then we are shining the light in the world, because there are enormous forces right now that want to squelch that want us to simply be programmed. Like that, what I talked about, just following the cultural program, buying what we're told to buy, doing what we're told to do. That's prison, that's enslavement. So real freedom and joy and truth and beauty come out of our inner wisdom, which comes from the inner work and then also the outer work that we're doing to build the community and bring these teachings from generation to generation. Every generation has the responsibility to receive the teachings and pass them on. We have to do that. And the only way we can pass them on authentically is to make the individual effort to live them, so they're passed on through every thought, word, and deed. And when we do that, when we make that effort, we are part of the healing of our planet. So I want to thank all of you, because I know you wouldn't have found your way through the door and be here if you were not already questioning the official stories in our society that lead to imprisonment and destruction and so forth, and then creating a positive community based on the truth of the interconnectedness and oneness of all life. There's one life living through us all, and we are that life, and love is our true nature, which is joy, which is the essential unity teaching. So bless you all. Thanks again for the efforts you're making. No effort we ever make is ever lost. Go forth and multiply this message. Thank you very much. Thank you.